Yuli Borisovich Brynner, Russian, Yuli Borisovich Brynner, July 11, 1920 to October 10, 1985, known professionally as Yul Brynner, was a Russian-born actor. He was known for his portrayal of King Monket in the Rodgers and Hammerstein stage musical The King and I, 1951, for which he won 2 Tony Awards, and later an Academy Award for Best Actor for the 1956 film adaptation. He played the role 4,625 times on stage and became known for his shaved head, which he maintained as a personal trademark long after adopting it for The King and I, considered one of the first Russian-American film stars. He was honored with a ceremony to put his handprints in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood in 1956. He also received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960. In 1956, Brynner received the National Board of Review Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of Ramesses II in the Cecil B. DeMille epic The Ten Commandments and General Boonean in Anastasia. He was also well known as the gunman Chris Adams in The Magnificent Seven, 1960, and its first sequel Return of the Seven, 1966. He had roles as the android, the gunslinger, in Westworld, 1973, and its sequel, Future World, 1976. In addition to his film credits, he worked as a model and photographer. He also wrote several books. Yul Brynner was born Yuli Borisovich Brynner on July 11, 1920, in the city of Vladivostok. He had Swiss German, Russian, and Buryat, Mongol ancestry. He also identified as having Roma ancestry. However, recent scholarship does not support that claim. He was born at his parents' home, a 4-story house on 15 Aloytskaya Street, Vladivostok, into a wealthy Swiss-Russian family of landowners and silver mining developers in Siberia and the Far East. He was named after his grandfather, merchant Yuli Ivanovich Brynner. At the time, the territory was controlled by the Far Eastern Republic, a communist Russian buffer state. Vladivostok was under Japanese occupation until 1922. The Brynner family enjoyed a good life at their 4-story mansion. In October 1922, the Red Army occupied Vladivostok, and most of the Brynner family's wealth was confiscated and nationalized at the end of the Russian Civil War. The Brynners were stripped of home ownership, but the family, including Yul's elder sister Vera, continued living in their house under a temporary status. Later in his life, Brynner humorously enjoyed telling tall tales and exaggerating his background and early life for the press, claiming that he was born Taijay Khan of a Mongol father and Roma mother on the Russian island of Sakhalin. He occasionally referred to himself as Julius Brynner, Jules Brynner, or Yul Brynner. The 1989 biography by his son, Roch Brynner, clarified some of these issues. Brynner's father, Boris Yulievich Brynner, was a mining engineer and inventor of Swiss German and Russian descent. He had graduated from Mining University in St. Petersburg in 1910. The actor's grandfather, Jules Brynner, Yuli Ivanovich, was a Swiss citizen who had moved to Vladivostok in the 1870s and established a successful import-export company. Brynner's paternal grandmother, Natalia Yosifovna Kurkatova, was a native of Irkutsk and a Eurasian of partial Buryat ancestry. Brynner's mother, Maria Morouzia Dmitrievna, née Blagovidova, Maria Dmitrievna Blagovidova, hailed from the Russian intelligentsia and had studied to be an actress and singer. According to her son, she was of Russian Roma ancestry. But documents examined by modern historians of Vladivostok claimed the Brynner family had no blood connections with Roma. Yul came into close contact with this culture in exile while working with his sister, singer Vera Brynner, and they were looking for a stage image. Vera later sharply objected to this appropriation. Brynner felt a strong personal connection to the Roma. In 1977 he was named honorary president of the International Romani Union, a title that he kept until his death. In 1922, after the formation of the Soviet Union, Yul's father Boris Brynner was required to relinquish his Swiss citizenship. All family members were made Soviet citizens. Brynner's father's work required extensive travel, and in 1923, in Moscow he fell in love with an actress, Katerina Ivanovna Kornikova. She was the ex-wife of actor Alexei Dickey, and stage partner of Michael Chekhov at the Moscow Art Theatre. Many years later, Katerina Kornikova would help Brynner with her letter of recommendation asking Michael Chekhov to employ him in his theatre company in America. In 1924, Yul's father divorced his mother Morouzia, but continued to support her and their children. His father also adopted a girl, because his new wife was childless. Many years later, after the death of his father, Brynner would take this adopted sister into his care. The father and son relationship remained complex and emotionally traumatic for Brynner. After leaving his children and his former wife in Vladivostok, Boris Brynner lived briefly in Moscow with Katerina Ivanovna Kornikova, but eventually they moved to Harbin, Manchuria. At that time it remained under Japanese control. Brynner established a business in international trade. In 1927, Morouzia Brynner took her children, Yuli and Vera, January 17, 1916 to December 13, 1967, and emigrated from Vladivostok to Harbin, China. There, young Yul and Vera attended a school run by the YMCA. In 1930, Boris gave Yuli an acoustic guitar as a birthday present. That guitar and the following music lessons made a lasting influence on Brynner's artistic development. His natural curiosity, creativity, and imagination became focused on mastering the guitar technique and studying classical and contemporary music. Brynner studied music under the guidance of his sister Vera, who was a classically trained opera singer. After several years of arduous studies, Brynner became an accomplished guitar player and singer. In 1933, fearing a war between China and Japan, Marozia Brynner moved with her children to Paris. Many Russians had moved there in exile after the revolution. There, on June 15, 1935, the 14-year-old Brynner made his debut at the Hermitage Cabaret, where he played his guitar and sang in the Russian and Roma languages. After initial success, he continued performing at various Parisian nightclubs, sometimes accompanying his sister, and playing and singing Russian and Roma songs. At that time, Brynner was a student at a lyceum in Paris, where he studied French. His classmates and teachers were aware of his strong character, as he was often involved in fist fighting. In the summer of 1936, Brynner worked as a lifeguard at a resort beach in Le Havre. There he joined a French circus troupe, trained as a trapeze acrobat and worked with a circus troupe for several years. After sustaining a back injury, he left the circus troupe. In nearly unbearable pain, Brynner took narcotics for relief. He soon developed a drug dependency. One day, while buying opium from a local dealer, Brynner met Jean Cocteau, 1889 to 1963, and the two became lifelong friends. Cocteau introduced Brynner to Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali, Josephine Baker, Jean Marais, and the bohemian milieu of Paris. The experience and connections eventually helped him in his multifaceted career of acting, directing, and producing. 17-year-old Brynner became a drug addict and the family tried to help him treat the illness. He spent a year in Lausanne, Switzerland treating his addiction at a Swiss clinic and at Lausanne University Hospital with financial support from his aunt Vera Dmitrievna Blagovidova Brynner, his mother's sister. Dmitrievna was a physician trained at medical school in St. Petersburg, Russia, before the revolution. She later practiced in China and Switzerland. The year-long treatment in Switzerland, which included hypnotherapy, had a lasting effect on Brynner's health. Yul never used illicit drugs again in his life. He later became addicted to cigarettes, which damaged his lungs and ruined his health as he aged. In Harbin, Brynner's father had a lucrative trade business and lived with his second wife, actress Katerina Ivanovna Kornikova. She gave Brynner his first professional acting lessons by showing him scenes from her repertoire at Moscow Art Theatre. She instructed him in how to respond to her lines using his voice tone and body language. During their first lessons, Katerina Kornikova demonstrated and explained to Brynner the principles of Konstantin Stanislavski's school of acting, and the innovative ideas of Michael Chekhov. Brynner was excited and impressed with the new experience. His father initially tried to prepare his son for a management position at their family business, but changed his mind after watching several acting lessons and witnessing Brynner's happiness. Katerina Kornikova was impressed with Brynner's intellectual and physical abilities and recommended him to study acting with her former partner Michael Chekhov. Brynner took the letter of recommendation from his stepmother and also accepted money and blessings from his father. With the generous support from both his father and stepmother, Brynner became encouraged and confident in his future success as an actor. At the same time, Brynner's mother's illness, clarification needed, progressed and required special medical treatment that was available only in the United States. Brynner traveled with his mother on a long trip across the world. In 1940, speaking little English, Brynner and his mother emigrated to the United States aboard the President Cleveland, departing from Kobe, Japan. They arrived in San Francisco on October 25, 1940. His final destination was New York City, where his sister already lived. Vera, a singer, starred in The Consul on Broadway in 1950. She also appeared on television in the title role of the opera Carmen. She later taught voice in New York. During World War II, Brynner worked as a French-speaking radio announcer and commentator for the U.S. Office of War Information, broadcasting to occupied France. He also worked for the Voice of America, broadcasting in Russian to the Soviet Union. At the same time, during the war years, he studied acting in Connecticut with the Russian actor Michael Chekhov. He worked as a truck driver and stagehand for Chekhov's theater company. By the time he turned 21, Brynner had already made several international journeys around the world, traveling between Asia, Europe, and America. Such extensive traveling contributed to his exposure to a variety of cultures and may have enriched his creativity. In 1941, Brynner made his stage debut in a Broadway production of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night that premiered on December 2, 1941. In it, Brynner appeared as Fabian. Luckily he had to deliver only a few lines, as his English was limited and he had a noticeable Russian accent. The job helped him to start adding English to the list of languages he spoke, which included Russian, French, Japanese, and Hungarian. The show closed, as did many other Broadway productions, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, when America declared war on Japan and Nazi Germany. Soon Brynner found a job as a radio commentator presenting war propaganda in French and Russian at the Voice of America radio station. He had little acting work during the next few years, but he co-starred in a 1946 production of Lute's Song with Mary Martin. He also did some modeling work and was photographed nude by George Platt Lines. In 1944, Brynner married actress Virginia Gilmore. Soon after, he began working as a director at the new CBS television studios. In 1948 and 1949, he directed and also appeared on television alongside his wife in the first 2 seasons of Studio One. He also appeared in other shows. Brynner made his film debut in Port of New York, released in November 1949. The next year, at the urging of Martin, Brynner auditioned for Rodgers and Hammerstein's new musical in New York. He recalled that, as he was finding success as a director on television, he was reluctant to go back on the stage. Once he read the script, however, he was fascinated by the character of the king and was eager to perform in the project. Brynner's role as King Mongkut in The King and I, 4,625 times on stage, became his best known. He appeared in the original 1951 production and later touring productions, as well as a 1977 Broadway revival, a London production in 1979, and another Broadway revival in 1985. He won the Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a Musical for the first of these Broadway productions and a special Tony for the last. He reprised the role in the 1956 film version, for which he won an Academy Award as Best Actor. He also played it in Anna and the King, a short-lived TV series on CBS in 1972. Brynner is one of only 10 people who have won both a Tony and an Academy Award for the same role. In 1951, Brynner shaved his head for his role in The King and I. Following the huge success of the Broadway production and subsequent film, Brynner continued to shave his head for the rest of his life. He wore a wig when necessary for certain roles. Brynner's shaven head was unusual at the time, and his striking appearance helped to give him an exotic appeal. Some fans shaved off their hair to imitate him. A shaven head was often referred to as the Yul Brynner look. Brynner's second motion picture was the film version of The King and I, 1956, with Deborah Kerr. It was a huge success critically and commercially. Cecil B. DeMille hired Brynner for The Ten Commandments, 1956, to play Ramesses II opposite Charlton Heston after seeing him in the stage version of The King and I, telling Brynner backstage that he was the only person for the role. He rounded out his year with Anastasia, 1956, co-starring with Ingrid Bergman under the direction of Anatoly Litvak. Both films were big hits and Brynner became one of the most in-demand stars in Hollywood. Citation needed. MGM cast Brynner as one of the brothers Karamazov, 1958, which was another commercial success. Less so was The Buccaneer, 1958, in which Brynner played Jean Lafitte. He co-starred with Heston, Inga Stevens, Claire Bloom and Charles Boyer in a historically accurate tale of the Battle of New Orleans. The film was produced by DeMille and directed by Anthony Quinn. MGM used Brynner again in The Journey, 1959, opposite Kerr under the direction of Litvak, but the film lost money. So too did The Sound and the Fury, 1959, based on the novel by William Faulkner with Joanne Woodward. However, Brynner then received an offer to replace Tyrone Power, who had died during the making of Solomon and Sheba, 1959, with Gina Lollobrigida. The movie was a huge hit, which postponed the development of a planned Brynner film about Spartacus. When the Kirk Douglas film Spartacus, 1960, came out, Brynner elected not to make his own version. Brynner tried comedy with two films directed by Stanley Donen. Once again, with Feeling, 1960, and Surprise Package, 1960, but the public response was not impressive. Made a cameo in The Testament of Orpheus. Although he was well received by audiences in The Magnificent Seven, 1960, a Western adaptation of The Seven Samurai for the Mirish Company. The picture was a disappointment on its initial US release. However, it was extremely popular in Europe and had lasting popularity. Its eventual success led to Brynner signing a 3-picture deal with Mirish. The film was particularly popular in the Soviet Union, where 67 million tickets were sold. He then made a cameo appearance in Goodbye Again, 1961. Brynner focuses on action films. Made Escape from Zagreb, 1962, with director Ronald Neme, and Taras Bulba, 1962, with Tony Curtis for J. Lee Thompson. Both films were commercial disappointments. Taras Bulba was popular but failed to recoup his large price. The first film under Brynner's 3-film contract with Mirish was Flight from Ushuaia, 1963, with George Chakiris. This was followed by Kings of the Sunday, 1963, also with Chakiris. Directed by Thompson. Neither film was particularly popular, nor Invitation to a Gunfighter, 1964, a Western. Morituri, 1965, opposite Marlon Brando. Failed to reverse the streak of unsuccessful films. He had cameo roles in Cast a Giant Shadow, 1966, and The Poppy is a Flower too, 1966. Brynner enjoyed a hit with The Return of the Seven, 1966. Reprising his role from the original. Less popular A Triple Cross, 1966, a war film with Christopher Plummer. The Double Man, 1967, a spy thriller. The Long Duel, 1967. An Imperial adventure story with Trevor Howard. Villa Rides, 1968, Western, and The File of the Golden Goose, 1969. Brynner went to Yugoslavia to star in a war film, The Battle of Neretva, 1969. Supported Katharine Hepburn in the big-budget flop The Madman of Shalott, 1969. Brynner appeared in drag, as a torch singer, in an uncredited role in the Peter Sellers comedy The Magic Christian, 1969. Brynner went to Italy to make the spaghetti western Adios Sabata, 1970, and supported Kirk Douglas in The Light at the Edge of the World, 1971. He remained in lead roles for Romance of a Horse Thief, 1971, and the western, Catlow, 1971. Brynner had a small role in Fuzz, 1972, then reprised his best-known role in the TV series Anna and the King, 1972, which ran for 13 episodes. After Night Flight from Moscow, 1973, in Europe. Brynner created one of his iconic roles in the cult hit film Westworld, 1973, as the Shooter, a robot killer. His next 2 films were variations on this performance. The Ultimate Warrior, 1975, and Future World, 1976. Brynner returned to Broadway in Home Sweet Homer, a famous flop musical. His last film was Death Rage, 1976, an Italian action film. Although Brynner had become a naturalized U.S. citizen, aged 22, in 1943, while living in New York as an actor and radio announcer, he renounced his U.S. citizenship at the U.S. Embassy in Bern, Switzerland, in June 1965 because he had lost his tax exemption as an American resident working abroad. He had stayed too long in the United States, meaning he would be bankrupted by his tax and penalty debts imposed by the Internal Revenue Service. In 2006, Brynner's son Rock wrote a book about his father and his family history titled Empire and Odyssey: The Brynners in Far East Russia and Beyond. He regularly returned to Vladivostok, the city of his father's birth, for the Pacific Meridian Film Festival. In addition to his work as a director and performer, Brynner was an active photographer and wrote 2 books. His daughter Victoria put together Yul Brynner, Photographer, a collection of his photographs of family, friends, and fellow actors, as well as those he took while serving as a UN Special Consultant on Refugees. Brynner wrote Bring Forth the Children: A Journey to the Forgotten People of Europe and the Middle East, 1960. With photographs by himself and Magnum photographer Inge Morath, and the Yul Brynner cookbook, Food Fit for the King and You, 1983. He enjoyed singing gypsy songs. In 1967, Dmitrievich and he released a record album, The Gypsy and I. Yul Brynner sings gypsy songs, Vanguard VSD 79265. Brynner married 4 times, his first 3 marriages ending in divorce. He fathered 3 children and adopted 2. His first wife, 1944 to 1960, was actress Virginia Gilmore, with whom he had 1 child, Yul Rock Brynner, 1946 to 2023. He was nicknamed Rock when he was 6 years old in honor of boxer Rocky Graziano. Rock was a historian, novelist, and university history lecturer at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and Western Connecticut State University in Danbury, Connecticut. Yul Brynner had a long affair with Marlene Dietrich, who was 19 years his senior. Beginning during the first production of The King and I in 1959, Brynner fathered a daughter, Lark Brynner, with Frankie Tilden, who was 20 years old. Lark lived with her mother and Brynner supported her financially. His second wife, from 1960 to 1967. Doris Kleiner is a Chilean model whom he married on the set during shooting of The Magnificent Seven in 1960. They had 1 child, Victoria Brynner, born November 1962, whose godmother was Audrey Hepburn. Belgian novelist and artist Monique Watteau was also romantically linked with Brynner, from 1961 to 1967. His third wife, 1971 to 1981. Jacqueline Simone Theon de la Chaume, 1932 to 2013, a French socialite, was the widow of Philippe de Croisset, son of French playwright Francis de Croisset and a publishing executive. Brynner and Jacqueline adopted 2 Vietnamese children, Mia, 1974, and Melody, 1975. The first house Brynner owned was the Manoir de Criquebeuf, a 16th-century manor house in northwestern France that Jacqueline and he purchased. His third marriage broke up, reportedly owing to his 1980 announcement that he would continue in the role of the king for another long tour and Broadway run, as well as his affairs with female fans and his neglect of his wife and children. On April 4, 1983, aged 62, Brynner married his fourth and final wife, Kathy Lee, born 1957. A 26-year-old ballerina from Ipoh, Malaysia, whom he had met in a production of The King and I. They remained married for the last 2 years of his life. His longtime close friends Meredith A. Disney and her sons Charles Elias Disney and Daniel H. Disney attended Brynner and Lee's final performances of The King and I. In 1979, Brynner settled out of court after allegedly contracting trichinosis at Trader Vic's in New York City. In September 1983, Brynner suffered a sore throat. His voice changed and doctors found a lump on his vocal cords. In Los Angeles, only hours before his 4,000th performance in The King and I, he received the test results, which indicated that he had inoperable lung cancer, though his throat was not affected. Brynner had begun smoking heavily at age 12. Although he had quit in 1971. His promotional photos often still showed him with a cigarette in hand, or a cigar in his mouth. He and the national tour of the musical were forced to take a few months off while he underwent radiation therapy, which damaged his throat and made singing and speaking difficult. The tour then resumed. In January 1985, the tour reached New York for a farewell Broadway run. Aware he was dying, Brynner gave an interview on Good Morning America discussing the dangers of smoking and expressing his desire to make an anti-smoking commercial. The Broadway production of The King and I ran from January 7 to June 30 of that year. His last performance, a few months before his death, marked the 4,625th time he had played the role of the king. Brynner died of lung cancer on October 10, 1985, at New York Hospital at the age of 65. His remains were cremated and the ashes were buried in the grounds of the Saint Michel de Bois-Aubry Orthodox Monastery, near Luzay, between Tours and Poitiers in France. Prior to his death, with the help of the American Cancer Society, Brynner created a public service announcement using a clip from the Good Morning America interview. A few days after his death, it premiered on all major U.S. television networks and in other countries. Brynner used the announcement to express his desire to make an anti-smoking commercial after discovering he had cancer, and his death was imminent. He then looked directly into the camera for 30 seconds and said, "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke. If I could take back that smoking, we wouldn't be talking about any cancer. I'm convinced of that." His year of birth, in one version of the commercial, was incorrectly given as 1915. On September 28, 2012, A 2.4 meters tall statue was inaugurated at Yul Brynner Park, in front of the home where Brynner was born at Aloytskaya Street No. 15 in Vladivostok, Russia. Created by local sculptor Alexei Boki, the monument was carved in granite monolith that was acquired in China and delivered to Vladivostok, Russia. It depicts him in the role of King Mongkut of Siam from The King and I. The grounds for the park were donated by the city of Vladivostok, which also paid additional costs. Vladivostok Mayor Igor Pushkaryov, U.S. Consul General Sylvia Curran, and Brynner's son, Rock, participated in the ceremony, along with hundreds of local residents. The Brynner family cottage in suburban Vladivostok is now a Yul Brynner museum. In 1956, Brynner imprinted his hands and feet into the concrete pavement in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood, California. In 1960, Brynner was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 6162 Hollywood Boulevard. In 2022, a podcast was launched celebrating his filmography, entitled, Here's Looking at Yul Kid, and has included guests such as Ron Howard. Brynner spent many years living, studying, and working in France, and his last will stated his wish to be buried there. His resting place at Abbaye Royale Saint-Michel-de-Bois-Aubry has a memorial mention dedicated to him.